Hi everyone, my name is Ingrid Giskes and I'm the Director of the Global Go Skier Initiative, and today we wanted to welcome you to our virtual dialogue, What Lies Beneath a Holistic Approach to Go Skier. So thank you everyone so much for joining. I see that people are still coming online, so we'll give everyone a minute and then we'll start with the panel. Great, so welcome everyone who just joined our panel, our virtual ocean dialogue, What Lies Beneath a Holistic Approach to Go Skier. My name is Ingrid Giskes and I'm the Director of the Global Go Skier Initiative, and I've got the pleasure today of moderating this panel. However, before we start our panel discussion, I just wanted to acknowledge all the events that are unfolding across the US and in the world and express our solidarity on behalf of the session team with the whole Black community. I think in times like these, it's really important to come together and speak from the heart and raise our voice to say what we believe in. So I'm really grateful for everyone joining this session today. So before we get started and I introduce you our fantastic panelists, I wanted to let you know that we're using Slido today to make this presentation as interactive as possible as we operate this new virtual reality. So we'll be posting a few audience polls during the session, and you'll be able to also submit your answers and Q&A questions through Slido. So if you're using a laptop or mobile device, please go to slido.com. You can see the link here on the screen and then enter your events codes, which is #GGGI. And then you will be directed to the page where our poll will go live. And as you are getting ready and getting set up, you'll see that our first poll is already live there. So this first poll is just to find out a little bit more about who's watching today. So if you see the question pop up, you can put in your answer and indicate which sector you're affiliated with. So while everyone's getting set up on Slido and answering the first question, I wanted to take the time to introduce our panelists of today. So first of all, we'll have Martin Exel, Managing Director for SeaBOS, speak. SeaBOS stands for the Seafood Business for Ocean Stewardship, and it represents 10 of the largest seafood companies in the world, all working together towards sustainable seafood production and a healthy ocean. Martin has been working in seafood business for more than 40 years, previously at Austral and now at SeaBOS. Welcome, Martin. Our next panelist will be Ben Kneppers. He is working for Bureo, and Bureo is a certified B Corp organization working to develop a net plus material from recycled plastics coming from end-of-life fishing gear. Ben's the co-founder of the initiative, working for more than 7 years already in this field, and has been instrumental to the expansion of the program globally. And then our next speaker of today will be Amado Blanco, the Regional Manager for Networks Southeast Asia. Networks recently formed a new initiative calling Coast for Seas, based from ZSL, the Zoological Society of London, coming out of their award-winning Networks program in order to scale their impact and reach. Currently, Coast for Seas is already active across 32 communities working on circular economy initiatives. So we look forward to hearing more from Amado about this new initiative. Welcome, Amado. And then our last speaker of today will be Thanda, and she's the director of the Myanmar Ocean Project. And the Myanmar Ocean Project is a Burmese NGO founded in 2018 and addressing the issue of go skier in the Miyak Archipelago, one of the most pristine areas in Myanmar. And she works really hard to remove go skier from sensitive habitats and ecosystems, and working also with fishers and community members to educate them about the go skier problem. Thank you so much for all of our panelists today for joining. And before we turn to the presentations, let's hear who's listening in from the audience. So we've got quite a big majority of NGO members joining us today, some people from the academic community and some government and corporate representatives as well. So really great, varied audience. Thank you so much, guys, for joining. So everyone who's just tuning in now, we'll be using Slido throughout this presentation. So please go to slido.com and enter the events code so you can submit your questions and also let your voice be heard during this session. All right. So the topic of today's panel is ghost gear, but what is ghost gear? So ghost gear is a common name used for abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear. It's one of the most harmful forms of marine debris for the ocean. And the main reason for this is because it's made out of plastic, modern plastic, which can last in the ocean up to more than 600 years. What is the cause of ghost gear? So the majority of ghost gear that is in our ocean is due to unintentional discard. No one ever wants to lose their fishing gear. So the majority of the fishing gear that is left behind is due to those unintentional causes, such as bad weather conditions, marine traffic, spatial pressures, or malfunctioning of traffic systems. We've listed a couple of the causes here on the slide. But the truth is that it occurs in every fishery, no matter how careful people are trying to be. Next slide, please. Ghost gear is a global problem and it's very much a cross-cutting issue affecting marine ecosystems, food security, and livelihoods. In 2019, it was estimated that about 640,000 tons of ghost gear got lost in the ocean every year. However, the estimate today is likely to be much, much higher, and studies are underway to come up with a more accurate figure reflecting the current situation. Ghost gear is also a big problem of plastic pollution, and recent studies suggest that it makes up 46 to 70% of all floating microplastics in the ocean if measured by weight. And as I mentioned, it's also a big problem for food security, and an estimated 5 to 30% of global fish stocks have been affected by the problem, affecting coastal communities and people's livelihoods. So in 2015, the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, a cross-sectoral alliance, was set up, and it is at the moment the only cross-sectoral alliance committing to driving solutions to the problem of lost and abandoned fishing gear worldwide. Our aims are to improve the health of marine ecosystems, protect marine life from harm, and protect also human health and livelihoods. We work across the 3 R's, reduce, remove, recycle, and our panelists today represent each of those 3 R's, so prevention, mitigation, and cure. And the initiative has been active for quite a few years, and in the last few years, we've seen an incredible growth in our membership. So at the moment, we have more than 107 member organizations all around the world, and we also have the kind support of 15 governments, making this a really active, vibrant, and global platform, but also showing how much people care around the world about this really important marine pollution and sustainable fisheries issue. And on the next slide, I just wanted to highlight some of the partner organizations that we work with. So our panelists today are obviously also partners in the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, but as you can see, there's still room for more on that wave. So hopefully some of you will be really inspired by what you hear today from our panelists and want to join the platform later on. Great, so I think this would set the scene adequately on what we are going to be talking today. So I wanted to turn it now to our first panelists. So our panelists structured across the 3 R's, as I mentioned, reduce, remove, recycle. And our first speaker, Martin Exel, will give a brief snapshot of the reduction and prevention side of things and what the seafood industry can and is already doing to help tackle the problem of ghost gear. So Martin, I'll turn it to you now.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, and good morning or good evening, depending on which part of the world you're in. It's a pleasure to be here indeed. To start, perhaps just a quick explanation on SeaBOS as a group. Yes, it is a collaboration of 10 of the largest seafood businesses in the world, but that collaboration is actually a partnership with the Stockholm Resilience Centre and science from both the UK and the US, as well as in Sweden, to truly create sustainable both fisheries and agriculture, and to work on improving the health of our oceans. To achieve that, we have identified the need to work with a number of collaborators, people with aligned views and objectives to those of SeaBOS, and the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, and particularly the work done by both Ingrid and Joel and the many others of their team, is one of those key planks in a collaboration that we are taking on with SeaBOS. Reducing and preventing fishing gear from getting into the ocean all seems very easy when you talk about it, but in reality, it's an extremely challenging problem. And our members span everything from feed production to agriculture, wild catch, post-harvest, and processing. And so, in fact, as a plastics general pollution, let alone just ghost gear, we cover a very broad spectrum of the area that is a problem for all of us. We're proud to do our bit to prevent and reduce the loss of fishing gear. And a big part of that is actually working on both best practice frameworks within the existing one, which is with wild catch, and the developing one for agriculture. And what we're looking to do there is to develop some frameworks that everybody can take and use in a practical, common sense way, without creating lots of added reporting requirements, without creating challenges for businesses, because if it's too difficult, people will actually stop doing it. And so the SeaBOS construct and concept is, let's find a way to have shared learning, let's find a way to collaborate with the experts, and let's find a way to actually solve the problem by doing it together. For those of you who may have missed it, the immediately preceding talk was on stemming ocean pollution, and there was a lot of discussion about stopping the plastic tap, creating sort of a framework, if you like, in plastics. And what SeaBOS did was created a framework of plastics from collecting and removing and recycling the fishing gear from the bottom of the ocean or the sea, right the way through to the pollution that's coming in from the city. And while we're working right here and talking right here about just the gear and just the problem that we have as a seafood industry with removing gear that indeed the seafood industry put in there in the first place, that recognition that it's a problem we all have to work together on is really critical, because we've got to stop plastics entering the environment in all way, shape and form. We're extending the learnings from within SeaBOS. We're a very newcomer to the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, having only joined a year ago. A number of us have been actually part of the original foundation of the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, and we're looking forward very much to promulgating some truly innovative approaches in agriculture. Is coming very fast, actually, with new programs for not just reduction and reuse, but actually repurposing of plastics that otherwise could end up lost, discarded or abandoned. And we're looking forward very much to answering questions and issues that people raise tonight. So I think from there, I might pass over to the next panelist, or back to you, Ingrid, whichever you prefer. Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much, Martin, for that inspirational overview. I'm sure there'll be many questions in the Q&A coming your way. So thanks so much. I'm now going to hand over to our next speaker, Ben Kneppers from Bureo, and he will be speaking to the second R in our panel, namely recycling. And Ben will talk a little bit more about how recycling of end-of-life fishing gear is helping to tackle the ghost gear problem, especially in the Latin American region. So Ben, I'll hand over to you now for a short overview.
Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity. Thank you for attending. My name is Ben Kneppers. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Bureo. We're a certified B Corp that's been operating for the last 7 years. focused on, really what we're focused on is creating a net positive solution to end-of-life fishing nets. So as it's already been touched on, discarded fishing gear has been identified in some studies as the most harmful source of ocean plastic pollution to marine life. And through the work with my two partners, David Stover and Kevin Ahern, we came up with this idea from our engineering backgrounds to flip it as an opportunity, really. I was based in Chile when we came up with this opportunity, and started to look into the situation there. And what I began to find quite quickly was, in many cases, the nets were being lost really not because there was a lack of care or effort being made by the fishermen, but a lot of it was just a lack of options. And so looking into the situation, one of the most tangible opportunities we found was to stop those nets at the source. So when they did meet their end of life, there could be a very tangible, very feasible way of doing something about them. And so that's what we set up. In 2013, we launched Net Positiva, Chile's first ever fishing net collection and recycling program, where we work together directly with the fisheries, from the largest commercial fishing companies to the smallest artisanal communities, where we provide them the infrastructure, the training and resources to now say, this is no longer a burdensome material, but it's a resource. And by training teams of local workers, we've given employment opportunities and incentives to now transform this once burdensome material into a really positive resource. We started with our crazy ideas, three surfers in Chile, by producing the first skateboard deck from 100% recycled fishing nets. We soon realized we were getting so much traction, not necessarily with our skateboard sales, but more with the fishing communities, that there was so much more that needed to be done about this program. And that's where we are today. To speed things up, we have a partnership through Patagonia's Tin Shed Venture program with Patagonia, the outdoor apparel company, where we're working incredibly close with Patagonia's materials team to develop much more innovative solutions beyond our skateboards and frisbees and surfboard fins, to see how we can take this at a much larger scale. And actually right here, you can see one of our first breakthroughs. Now every single Patagonia hat brim is made with our plastic. It's fully traceable, 100% end-of-life fishing nets sourced through our program that's now operating across Argentina, Chile, and Peru. Now that we have this solution dialed and an opportunity to grow, the work we're really after now is scaling this program to bring this solution to every fishery in need. That's what I'm working on now, based in South America. Obviously, due to the recent setbacks, it's been a little bit slower than usual, but we have a really exciting future ahead. And I'm happy to use this time to share with you the insights I've had over this incredible 7-year journey. So I'll stop it there for now and pass it on to our next panelist. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ben. I've heard this story a few times, but I always get inspired hearing it again. So thank you so much for talking a little bit more about all the work that you're doing around recycling. So I'm going to hand over now to our next speaker, Amado, who's also going to be talking about recycling, but more from a Southeast Asian perspective. And he's going to talk a little bit more about how the Networks program that has won so many awards has now been transforming into the Coast for Seas program. So Amado, I'll hand over to you for a short overview on your work in Southeast Asia.
Well, thank you very much, Ingrid, and good evening or good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. So we're glad to be invited and to speak and share our story. So we started in 2012, so this is already our an 8-year journey. So we deal mostly with artisanal or small-scale fisheries. So what Networks has been doing was essentially to link poor coastal communities to global supply chains of of used fishing nets. And that more or less has been the model that we're considering to replicate in other commodities. No? As mentioned earlier, networks is now at the stage that it's transforming into a more diverse, a more comprehensive institution we call COAST. No? But we consider our work with Boost fishing gears, with used fishing nets, as the ground zero for what we are intending to do in the next few years. So in the Philippines, which is the third biggest contributor of ocean plastics globally, we started testing if we can set up something that involves different stakeholder groups, so that we can start showing that something can be done with the big issue of plastics in the ocean. So what we did was to have conversations with a corporate partner interface, which is the biggest manufacturers of carpet tiles globally. We also had conversations with our technology partner, Aquafil, which happens to be, I think, one of the first who discovered the technology of recycling used fishing nets into new yarn, which could be used to produce high-end products like carpet tiles. So the networks was essentially an outcome of a conversation of three partners: Interface, Exel, and Aquafil. So of course, it was an airplane. It cannot fly without the frontliners. So we had to link up with local governments, local communities, to see if we can actually pull in our thinking, our resources, then help address, think of something, a model that can help address the issue of plastics. So what we need was to think of a particular type of plastic to serve as a model. So the different stakeholder groups that I mentioned earlier played very crucial roles. For instance, Aquafil provided technology that actually opens up the supply chain. Of course, Interface offered or set up the market that actually ensured that our communities would continue collecting the nets. So it's good to, I only have 5 minutes, but I think I'd like to pick up or emphasize more on what we realize, what are the insights that we can share for the other groups who are planning to do what we're doing. So one of the most important thing to do is to think about the right social infrastructures. I think it's probably relevant in the Southeast Asian context where we're very poor. No? So as you know, the economic returns from plastics recycling in general is not always very significant. So you think of something, a mechanism that actually sustains interest for recycling, even if people are only generating small amounts of income from recycling. So what we did was to integrate a social infrastructure we call Village Savings and Loan Association. So if you have something that can sustain economic interest over time, even if they are not completely satisfied with the economic returns from the plastic recycling, then you have a good chance of actually setting up something that is not completely dependent on the economies of scale of the commodity that you're recycling. So the community banks, we call them community banks, actually provide basic financial services that are not always available to very poor fishing communities. No? The community banks can provide loan services and, of course, credit services. So even if they are not completely satisfied with the earnings from recycling, their interest to sustain the collection is always there because they have something that helps them survive, even in seasons where you can only collect small amounts of nets. So as I mentioned earlier, so we are engaging communities, we're engaging municipal governments, which is very crucial. So in our country, our municipal waters are managed by the local government units. So it's very critical, it's very important that we have very good support from our local governments. The other point that I would like to share is you need to link up or to hook up with broader agenda. So in our case, it's sustainable fisheries, more particularly making sure that marine protected areas are well financed. So in the Philippines, we are one of the most prolific countries in terms of the number of MPAs that we set up. So we have more or less 1,800 across the country. But only 3 out of 10 MPAs are actually working because a lot of them are grappling with the issue of sustainable financing. So what we did was to link up the potential income generation abilities of recycling to also help address the issue of how do you sustain effective management of your MPA. So what I'm trying to say is it's good if you are able to link up your recycling activity to bigger, broader goals like sustainable fisheries and MPAs. Everyone can relate easily with MPAs because we are one of the countries where our fishing grounds have been depleted over time. I do not know how much time I have, but
I think we're gonna have to leave it here, Amado.
Okay. So I would welcome questions, but I think, yep.
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting overview. I know that we all could talk about this for a long time, but I wanted to make sure that we have enough time for our next panelists as well. And there'll be an opportunity to ask Amado more questions about his project and all the amazing work that he's been doing in the Q&A at the end of the panel. So I now wanted to hand it over to Thanda, and she's going to be talking about the third R, the removal work, and talk a little bit more about how the removal of ghost gear is also helping to educate fishers and the Myanmar community about the problem of ghost gear. So I'll hand over for Thanda now.
Hi, everyone. My name's Thanda. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be part of this panel. I am from Myanmar, and so a little background. Before I started working with ghost gear, I was just a really keen diver. I dived a lot in Australia and lots of places in Southeast Asia. And so my exposure to the ocean was through marine parks and protected areas with regulations and communities that rely greatly on the marine tourism industry, and they want to protect it, they want to share it, and they're proud of it. And then I came back to Myanmar and imagined diving untouched, pristine reefs and exploring empty islands where there's no tourists. But what I found was very, very different, shockingly different. So no tourists and very little protection also meant people just didn't know what was going on in the water. So as soon as I started diving in 2013. It was fishing gear presence was very obvious, and then throughout the different seasons we were was diving, it was very evident that the problem was getting worse at a pretty scary rate. And then one dive we encountered a huge sort of gill net covering a reef that was killing lots of bamboo sharks, and from that it sort of led me to organize the cleanup, and then one thing led to another. I founded Myanmar Ocean Project, and we are now a member of the Global Ghost Year Initiative. So last year in 2019, we conducted expeditions across Gate Archipelago with the support of Net Geo Society and Ocean Conservancy and GGGI. So the goal really was to try to understand how bad, or the scope, assess the scope of the ghost gear problem in Myanmar, because up until now, there's been no data collection of any kind on ghost gear in Myanmar. And so what we did, we went 6 expeditions to different locally managed marine areas, 2 marine parks, surveyed a few abandoned dive sites. We came back, we ended the year collecting close to 2 tons of ghost gear, surveyed around 80 sites. And what we found was we have a huge ghost gear problem. So 90% of the sites we surveyed had some form of ghost gear. On some of the expedition, it was 100% of the sites. But what was revealing was a lot of the sites we were finding was huge massive pieces of nets covering pinnacles, multiple layers. And they were pretty obvious that they weren't being dumped and they were being lost. So we did a lot of engaging with the fishermen to try to understand why they're losing that many huge pieces of nets. And we're only just starting to do that, but from our understanding, it is happening because of a lot of gear conflicts. And obviously there is a lot of lack of infrastructure and support for small fisheries to dump their gear as well. But there was also a lot of encouraging things we found. So there is already a few healthy sort of informal recycling culture at junkyards at all the small coastal towns we visited. And then at Lampi Marine Park, the only marine park in Myanmar, there was the least ghost gear we found in all of the places we visited. The park only has 6 rangers allocated, so it's a huge task for them. But even with very little enforcement, because of the status of the area, people care to complain if there is any illegal activities going on. People feel like they could say something, they could do something about it when there is that sort of protection title. So, well, from our expeditions, it sort of went from, I think Myanmar might have a ghost gear problem, to confirming, I think we have a huge ghost gear problem in this country. It's been a little bit challenging to start the conversation, to engage with people in all different sort of areas, because it's so new. The concept of, hey, we have a lot of nets and rubbish in the oceans, just it's not something people have thought about. So from my perspective, I think Myanmar is still developing. We have a great opportunity to strike a good balance between protecting the environment and protecting the livelihood of these communities that rely on fishing, and to sort of develop a balance between the tourism industry and the fishing industry, because right now there is no blooming tourism industry. But yeah, so that's about it.
Great, thanks so much, Thanda, for that overview. And I think to make it even better, we have a short video lined up as well on Thanda's project work that we'd like to show now. Great, thanks so much for showing that video. It's always so inspirational to see the work firsthand as well, especially now that we live in this virtual reality. It's nice to see some snapshots of real life outside of this room. So thanks so much to our panelists for the great presentations. I think it's now time to hear from the audience again. So we will make time for an Slido poll now. So please join us again on slido.com and enter your event code hashtag GGGI if you haven't done so. And the question this time is, how are you affected by ghost gear? So there's a couple of options there to click on. So we'll give everyone a couple of minutes to fill out the poll. We've got the answers coming in now. Give it a couple more minutes. Great, it seems like a close tie between the first option, it harms species that I care about, and it harms other resources that my business or community depends on. At least no one's clicking the last option. I think that's the most important thing. Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for participating. So we'll now, I think the figures are still moving a little bit, but I think it's clear that it's a tie between the first two options. So thank you so much. We'll go now to our Q&A section of the panel, where we'd love to answer some questions through our panelists that you guys submitted. So the first question I'd like to ask our panelists is, how have cross-sectoral partnerships benefited you and your organization? I think some of you already highlighted that you're part of the Global Ghost Gear Initiative and some of the work that we've done together. But why do you think cross-sectoral partnerships working across different industries can help solve this problem? Does anyone in particular wanted to take that question? Yeah, Martin.
Hi, yeah, Martin Exel again. Sorry, yeah. I think the inevitable answer is, in fact, lying in our panel itself and the conversations. It cannot be achieved alone. And the cross-sectoral partnerships, if you look, we have divers, we have conservation, we have innovators, we have business people, we have science, we have government, unfortunately not on the panel necessarily, but you know, the support for the Global Ghost Gear and the shared learning is crucial, as is developing that trust. And I really enjoyed Thanda's little video at the end there in terms of not forgetting the education and actually explaining to everybody involved in the process why it needs to be resolved and how we can actually prevent, reduce, recycle and reuse what is currently ghost gear. Over.
Great, thanks so much, Martin.
I'm happy to build on that, if that's okay, Ingrid.
Go for it then.
Great. Yeah, I just would absolutely echo what Martin's saying. We came into this as a very small business, and if it wasn't for the willingness of all the partners across many sectors that were willing to support us, this absolutely never would have happened. From the government of Chile giving us a small grant to set up our business in Chile, to the willingness of the fishermen and the fishing communities to engage with us and be so willing and open to take such a strange thought to them at the time of taking their trash away and coming back with a skateboard, to the willingness of the recycling partners that we have that open their doors to us, let us try something as crazy as putting a foreign material into their recycling equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and give it a go and finally find those breakthroughs we needed to make it happen. It was absolutely essential at every step of the way that we needed engagement and support across these sectors. And I just can't stress that enough. And just to highlight, I really think that's what GGGI is all about too. We have so many sectors involved in this organization. Anyone that's interested in taking action in their own communities, this is such a great place to get started. By reaching out to GGGI and showing you want to take action, we can really help bring those people together that you're going to need to do something about it. So certainly wanted to highlight that point as well, but I'll pass it on now.
Thanks so much, Ben, for that pitch. And yeah, definitely at the last slide, we'll have our contact details. So if anyone's interested in reaching out, definitely make sure that you do. We're always interested in hearing from more organizations. So I think in the last question, we talked already a little bit about partnership and different stakeholders involved. And there have been a few questions coming through around the role that the fishing community can play and the role that fishers can play in this story. So I wanted to pass specifically to either Amado or Thanda to highlight a little bit more on what incentives are being provided to fishers to participate in the programs that you do and why their role is important in your programmatic work, but also in the wider role of addressing ghost gear. So I don't know who wants to go first, Amado or Thanda?
May I?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah. Incentives. So of course, so essentially people were just throwing their used fishing gears on the shoreline. So before the project, it had zero value. So we suddenly entered and started buying. So there was economic incentives from recycling. I mentioned also earlier about the social infrastructure that we adopted, the community banks or the relays and loans and saving associations. So which creates another layer of economic and social opportunities for incentives for community partners. The other layer of incentive that is also organic to our approach is the opportunity that communities who are partnering with us will have a chance to avail of scientific advice on how they might manage more effectively their marine protected areas. As I said earlier, only 3 out of every 10 MPAs in the Philippines are working. So there's a huge gap in terms of advising, especially science advising and financial sustainability advising. So direct economic incentives in form of income, direct economic incentives in the form of access to loans and savings, and indirect benefit in terms of the potential future spillover impacts of MPAs that we're also assisting.
Great, thanks so much, Amado. Thanda, did you have anything to add around your engagement with the fishing community?
I think, in terms of incentives, I'm still figuring out because we haven't really started collection work. But I think the easiest way so far for us to engage, especially in the villages, is because we actually stayed with them. We sort of get to see and interact with them in more ways than we could have ever imagined if we, I found the expeditions where we stayed in the villages were more successful as opposed to where we had less interactions with the fishermen in the villages.
Great, thanks so much for that, Thanda. The next question I wanted to ask, more specifically, I guess to Ben or Amado, is around the link between end-of-life fishing gear and addressing ghost gear, and the importance or not importance of disposal facilities and the availability of that in the whole ghost gear story.
Would you like to go, Amado?
Yeah, Ben, please.
Oh, okay.
And then Amado can add.
Sure. So when we looked at the issue from the start, looking at the problem of discarded fishing gear versus end-of-life fishing gear, what we came across as a recycling opportunity and really as a feasibility of this effort. The analogy we always used was if you walked into your kitchen and your sink was overflowing with water flowing all over your kitchen floor, are you going to grab a mop or are you going to turn off the tap? And so what we've taken to is turning off the tap, stopping it at its source. You've got in addition to what's going on in the ocean and nets being lost, 80% of land-based, 80% of ocean plastic is from land-based sources. So what we found is it actually is more deeper than just saying this is infrastructure here to turn back your nets, and even giving the incentives to pay the fishermen per kilo to return those nets. It's actually much more of what Amado's been touching on is much more of a mental shift that you need to get through to understand that through this whole life cycle that the fishermen are going to be experiencing with these nets, that they need to take care and give them good reasons why. Yes, it's good we can pay them per kilo. Yes, it's convenient that we have the infrastructure. But even beyond that, what we're finding now is when the fishermen understand this positive solution we have, they're even taking care on board, and they're making greater efforts when out at sea, when they're in these situations where it might seem more convenient to simply cut the nets loose. They're getting more conscious about what consequences are in place. And so really what we're trying to do is create a behavior change and create something that is going to be about, yes, the simple, tangible thing of when your net is at its end of life, return it to us and we can have a positive solution for it. And that's very feasible for us from a logistics standpoint to simply collect it directly back from the fishermen. But deeper, as I've been touching on, it's much more about creating the consciousness in the communities to no longer perceive these materials as waste and no longer see it as a single option being to discard it, burn it, and that's the end of the story. That there's a lot more to this that needs to be considered, and they're now figuring that out, and that's where we've seen the best results when it comes to dealing with this issue.
Thanks so much, Ben. That's very clear. Amado, did you have any points that you wanted to add?
Yeah, just to add, education is very crucial. So on top of the economic incentives, I think it's very important that people understand the more fundamental, the more basic rationale that underpins why we need to collect, we need to prevent end-of-life gears from entering into our fishing grounds. No? For us, I think we have figured out a way of preventing end-of-life from entering the fishing grounds. So, but we have found big challenges in removing fishing gears that are already in the fishing grounds, because it takes a lot of effort organizing, and that means you will have to convince committee members to allocate some of their precious time collecting, diving, and removing fishing gears that have been on the fishing grounds for years. So yeah, the community partners that we have set up are essentially social receptacles for the end of life. And linking back to the point earlier raised by Ben, the value of education. So the groups do not only collect the nets that are in their end of life, but we also use them as a social platform for conservation education, which is very important so that we will understand the more fundamental rationale that underpins these initiatives. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amado. And I think it's an important point to highlight that even though, you know, we're talking about recycling here, there's also a really important aspect around education and raising awareness. So all of the different projects, even though we're trying to classify them in one of the 3 R's, they actually cut across all of the 3 R's. So thanks so much for that insight. I wanted to now ask Martin a question that came through as well around regulatory frameworks. So we've already mentioned briefly the best practice framework for the management of fishing gear, both in wild capture fisheries and aquaculture operations that the GGGI has been working on with input from SeaBOS. But I wanted to hear if there was other incentives or regulatory frameworks in place or that you could see in the future that would be helpful to guide industry efforts on ghost gear.
Thanks, Ingrid, and the questionnaire. I think actually regulatory impacts and requirements are going to be essential. At the moment, there are a lot of regulatory arrangements, and one of the questions talks about regional fisheries management organisations, where people are actually reporting and fishers are reporting loss of gear or recovery of gear or whatever, but it's not harnessed and focused in a way where it can be properly dealt with. And that's the real advantage of the GGGI, where you're creating a data platform so that the regulatory networks can actually feed that information into a single repository, so we can start getting a much better handle on perhaps where are the big issues and the big problems, what is being done to actually resolve them, and what incentives and disincentives work. Because of course, big part of this is also that shared learning. So there will be an education arrangement which works particularly in some areas, but in others, unless you put in a requirement that says if you lose X amount of gear, you stop fishing, operators won't actually do anything about it. And I think that's the reality. We're dealing with the full span. Regulations requiring accountability for your fishing gear and accountability for doing our bit in terms of making sure the ocean is healthy. It's just critical. It really is.
Great, thanks so much, Martin. Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight that point around gathering evidence to feed into those regulatory frameworks, and that's exactly what the GGGI is trying to do through its data portal, is really collecting that information and the evidence base to then define and formulate those best practices on. And I think there was a question about RFMOs as well, and whether they're part of the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, and Martin's already touched on this in his reply. At the moment, the Global Ghost Gear Initiative has observer status with a few RFMOs, particularly where it pertains to FADs, but it is an area of expansion that we're looking at for the coming years. So it's definitely on our radar, and definitely an opportunity for us to do a little bit more work in that space as well. So I now wanted to ask Thanda a question. So we already heard a little bit, Thanda, about the work that you did with fishers to engage them on the issue. But I wanted to bring it back again to that community level, and how you were able to reach out to all those community members and get them involved in the ghost gear recovery project that you're leading in Myanmar.
I think a lot of these communities are really remote and isolated, and in the most cases, they're sort of neglected. There's no running water, there's no electricity. So I sort of, to engage with them to understand waste management, I think I kind of wanted them to sort of feel like they can be part of the solution, because you needed to empower them to sort of let them feel like they can do something about this problem, because otherwise they sort of just live with it. I mean, with the kids, I suppose it helps when I have cookies. But I think it's usually, I think there's always a lot of curiosity with the community whenever we stay with them for a few weeks, because I think, like I said, they have never really interacted with people outside of their island. So when you show up in these scuba gear and doing all of these, and you start showing them pictures, and I think it helps a great deal that I speak the language, and I am a woman, so I think I kind of sort of not just speak to people at a formal level. I could just sort of be connecting with the whole community in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think that's a really important point, and thanks for bringing the gender question into the equality here as well, and really operating at local level within the local communities. And I think, that's what we've seen to the GGGI, that the most effective projects are really the ones that take into account that local context and working together with local stakeholders to drive change. So another question that I wanted to ask Amado, building on what Thanda just highlighted around the importance of local community and respecting the local context, is around the replication of projects. So within a GGGI, we really try and replicate and scale up different projects. So it's not just about having all different kinds of projects all around the world, but really talking about lessons learned and scaling up. And Amado, you mentioned that you're active in 32 communities at the moment, and I was just interested to hear how you were able to gradually scale your project from one community to now 32 communities.
Yes, if we include our sites in Cameroon, West Africa, and some sites in Indonesia, we're actually present in 40 communities around the world. So I think the take-home message that in that along that line is these are the factors that I see very critical to our ability to think of replication or progress to another stage. One is our access to good science. I think we're very lucky that we were co-founded by Exel, so we had a very good we had good access to good science. Second very important factor was strong corporate and technological partners, because you're talking of supply chain. You actually need corporate and technology partners so that you can essentially set up a new supply chain for commodity for resources that people normally see as nothing or waste. That's like the use of fishing nets. The third critical element that I would consider very important is the choice of the social infrastructure, especially in our context. Now, when you do this in partnership with communities, you need to think of something that actually will not be very difficult to sell to communities. And lastly, I think the linkage to broader and higher goals, as mentioned earlier, sustainable fisheries and making sure that your local MPAs are effective or making or attaining the conservation and fisheries objectives. So I think those are the four major factors that I see are key to our ability to do replications.
Great, thanks so much, Amado. That's very clear. So I think we've come to the end of the Q&A session now, but we have one last audience poll. So please join us again at slido.com and enter your event code #GGGI. And we are going to create a word cloud here. So hopefully all of you feel very creative and very inspired by all of the presentations that you just heard. And we'd just like you to enter 1 or 2 words of what you think is a key element of success to address ghost gear. So 1 or 2 words, it can be in your own language, doesn't have to be in English, of what are key elements of addressing ghost gear. So we'll give it a couple of minutes as we see our world word cloud come onto our screen. I see collaboration. I'm glad that that's in there. Don't be shy, feel free to enter. Great. Nice, I see a lot of keywords that were mentioned by our panelists. Education, another key one around the prevention side. Fishers, a very important stakeholder group as we discussed. Great, and the bigger the words are, that means that more and more people are entering that word. So collaboration, engagement, education, and regulation are definitely leading at the moment. Very great to see what's on people's mind. And I think it reflects well what our panelists do in their work as well. So we'll be posting this visual later on our website, etc. as well. So we'll keep it open for now. But with 1 minute to spare, I wanted to close this panel. Thank you so much for being an incredible audience, for all of the questions, all of the inspirational words you entered in the word cloud. Thank you so much to our panelists for getting up early or staying up late, and for all of the inspiring work that you do and continue to do every day, even in this new reality that we all live in, to help protect our oceans, our fisheries from the threat that ghost gear is. Thank you so much to the organizers from the Friends of Ocean Action and the World Economic Forum to invite us for this deep dive session and for being so professional and setting us up. And last but not least, thank you for my amazing team to make this whole presentation and this session work so smoothly. Don't know what we could have done without you. So we hope it was a really interesting panel session. And we look forward to stay connected with many of you after this panel as well. So feel free to reach out on the email addresses below, and we hope to stay in touch and hear from you soon. Thank you so much.